So thank you for inviting me. And I offer these remarks humbly and take full responsibility for any. It's from my own understanding and study, and take full responsibility for any errors or mistakes. But I wanted to talk about what is insight, because Vipassana meditation is also known as insight meditation. And though we all use the word insight in our ordinary conversations, today I want to talk about specifically what insight refers to in Vipassana practice. Vipassana, the word in Pali, the language of the oldest Buddhist scriptures, literally means clear seeing. And we usually characterize that as seeing clearly how things are. But I think a better phrasing of that is seeing clearly how things have come to be. Seeing clearly how things have come to be just as they are in this moment of awareness implicitly acknowledges the underpinning of cause and effect and the working of karma. And of course, seeing experience in the context of karma and cause and effect is wise understanding or wise view, the first aspect of the Eightfold Noble Path. Vipassana practice is mindfulness practice, and the word for mindfulness in Pali is sati, which also connotes remembering. Remembering over and over again to come back to our direct experience, the unfolding of events in the present moment without judgment or story. Gil Fronsdal, the guiding teacher of the Insight Meditation Center of the Mid-Peninsula in California, puts it this way: mindfulness develops inclusive, at times even choiceless awareness, noting whatever arises predominantly in our experiences. It is an accepting awareness that clarifies our feelings, thoughts, motivations, attitudes, and ways of reacting. Such awareness, in turn, helps us to develop compassion and equanimity, both of which support liberation. As mindfulness deepens and sharpens, we begin to experience the liberating aspects of practice. These are the insights into the three characteristics of all conditioned or phenomenal existence. This is our human predicament. The three characteristics in Pali are dukkha, anicca, and anatta, usually translated as suffering, impermanence, and not self. Ruth King, the brilliant author of Mindful of Race, puts this very succinctly as everything is imperfect, impermanent, and impersonal. The first of these universal characteristics, dukkha, is usually translated as suffering, but again, that skews the scope of the word. Other translations are stress, disease, that which is hard to bear. Etymologically, the word comes from the misalignment when the hub of a wheel does not fit the axle. So we can think of dukkha as being out of alignment with the way things have come to be, which relates to the difficulty in accepting the two other characteristics, impermanence and no substantial self. The anicca characteristic, impermanence, is the constancy of change on a macro and micro level. It is the dynamic of the universe, the cycle of birth and death, the cascade of bodily sensations and mental states. The anatta characteristic is understood as non-ego, egolessness, impersonality experience, not self. And of course, this is the most difficult of the three characteristics to apprehend because we have such a strong self of me, such strong sense of me, myself, and I, a personality that is who I am, a continuum with an essential core, whereas what we really empirically experience is a continually self-consuming process of arising and passing bodily and mental phenomena. No separate ego identity within or without this process. While we can have a robust conceptual appreciation of these three characteristics and find them useful in framing our ordinary day-to-day experience so that we are not so reactive and we suffer less, the true liberation is through the experiential insight of Vipassana meditation. Although conceptual insight is not ultimate, it is important in the development of ultimate insight, and it is vital to skillfully responding to our own situation and the situations of others. We can recognize dukkha whenever we find ourselves resisting, agitated, stuck, clinging, all the afflictive emotions. Joseph Goldstein, one of the first Westerners to bring Vipassana practice to the US and one of the co-founders of the Insight Meditation Society, remarks that dukkha is the inevitability of unwanted experiences, something everyone who has a body can appreciate. So too, in our ordinary daily experience of anicca, impermanence, we recognize how things are always changing, often subtly. For example, like, where did this sudden irritated mind come from? Or more dramatically, remember early March 2020. All of us had plans for the next few weeks and months, but in less than 2 weeks, we were all on lockdown in the US. We've all had our lives suddenly upended. The unexpected death of a loved one, a serious medical diagnosis for ourselves or our family or a friend. Again, Joseph Goldstein, anything can happen at any time. The more we take this to heart in our daily lives, the more we will be prepared to respond with equanimity to the vicissitudes of life. The writer and climate activist Rebecca Solnit puts it this way. Rebecca declares herself a Buddhist, but she spends a lot of time at Upaya with her good buddy, Roshi Joan Halifax. And she says, recognize that what is unlikely is possible, just as what is likely is not inevitable. Plan and accept that the unexpected often disrupts plans for the better and for the worse. The changes that we experience as we age provide us with an intimation that what we regard as self is not some existential, enduring me, but a kaleidoscope of changing physical and mental events and states. Think of the way each of us identified ourselves 10 or 20 years ago, maybe student, even lead singer in a garage band, partnered, employed, athletic, etc. Some of these identities have morphed and some have disappeared. The mind is not so nimble as we age. The mental Rolodex is harder to access for those who remember what a Rolodex is. What is the self that we are clinging to? It is conditioned and it can and will change, though the effort of selfing persists. These ordinary experiences and reflections on dukkha, anicca, and anatta can be understood as relative insights. As such, they prepare us for the non-conceptual, transformative insight of the deep states of Vipassana meditation. We can come to know dukkha, anicca, and anatta in an unmediated, non-conceptual experience that offers a taste of liberation. These are the penetrating insights of Vipassana, seeing clearly the suffering of clinging, the inexorable momentum of impermanence, and the impersonality of our personal experience. As we practice seeing clearly, we may get at first just a glimpse of these transformative insights, but this is often enough to strengthen our faith that this is a liberating path out of suffering. We let go of clinging. On the deepest level, with insight, we are no longer contesting fundamental reality, no longer clinging to a misaligned, distorted reality, but are free to act wholeheartedly for the benefit of all beings. Again, Joseph Goldstein, it doesn't matter to what we don't cling. The mind of non-clinging is vast. It is receptive to everything, but holds on to nothing. So I'll close with the liberating insight poem of from the Therigatha, the poems of the eldest nuns, the original Nuns Sangha. And this is a poem by Patakara, and the translation is by Maddie Weingast. And this is her liberating insight. Farmers turn up the soil, plant seeds, and wait. All by itself, water pours down from the sky and turns earth into food. After all these years, sleeping on the ground, waking before dawn, and begging for every meal, where's my harvest? Late one evening, I was washing my feet after another long day of sitting and walking. The water poured over my feet and onto the ground. I let my mind go, and it flowed downhill with the water toward my little hut. I went inside, sat on the bed, and lowered the wick of the lamp. All by itself, the flame went out. So thank you for your kind attention, and I would be delighted to talk about this, answer any questions you might have as best I can, and so please unmute yourself and chime in.
Thank you, Patrice. I will chime in. I really, really appreciate your short talk. It's I've always wondered why we need to speak for an hour. Anyway, when we can say it in 20 minutes. And here's one thing that I really appreciated about what you said. I don't remember who the person was exactly, but their definition of dukkha was imperfect, impermanent, and impersonal. And those are all negatives. And that's fine. But what I really think our human mind seeks is the perfect, the permanent, and the personal. I believe we are like, we crave for perfect, impermanent, and personal. That's what we crave for. It's kind of in our genes. I mean, it's just our biology. But reality is not that. Reality is imperfect. It's not permanent and it's not personal. So I really, and you know, how can you go over that again and again as you live and say, me living in this world is not personal? Are you kidding? How can that be possible? And yet, really, that if you want to find some freedom, that's where you got to go. Living in this world as me, Dokai, is not a personal thing. And as far as I know, that's just about as free as you can get. That it's not personal, Dokai. Whatever happens, it's not personal. That's not to say we can't. We do need to take responsibility for our personal actions. So just to say that. I do like your analogy of the Rolodex. I do have one, actually. It's right back there. I won't bring it out. And I still haven't made that complete transition yet to going. I just, um, finally, you said from the ground, or one of the things you said was the ground, there's rain and the ground produces food. I just had an insight there that I really appreciate this process or this mechanism of photosynthesis. Uh, Photosynthesis means plants can actually take light and transfer it into chemical energy. And that's what sustains us all. If they can't do that, we wouldn't be here. So you mentioned things planted in the ground and food arises, but that that little process, well, it's not little, it's like pretty complicated. But isn't that just amazing that
Mm-hmm.
are what keep us alive in this world? And sometimes we don't really respect plants that much. So anyway, that's just my comments, and thank you so much, Patrice, for your talk. It was very nourishing for me. Thank you.
Thank you. The comment imperfect, impermanent, impersonal is from it's Ruth King, who has a wonderful book, Mindful of Race, and one of the ways she talks about, as a Black woman, as Black Buddhist, dealing in some sense with racism, and which she calls a heart disease, is to really take these characteristics and particularly working with impersonality in a way of um, and I think sometimes one of the ways I understand that impersonality of experience is sometimes being just like you're just the placeholder. So for example, when I worked with the Minnesota AIDS Project, one of my jobs was to answer the AIDS line. And there was a monthly lottery in which people would get money for things that they needed. But it was a lottery. There were always more people applying than there were funds. And so when people weren't chosen for the lottery, and always at the end, call the AIDS line if you want more assistance. But people would call and they'd be really, really angry that they weren't picked that month, that they really needed the money. Their rent was, and I would just listen and empathize, and it was completely impersonal. And I also felt, and this gave me a really good feeling when people were yelling at me, was that I was a totally safe person for people to yell at. Like I wouldn't there was nothing I could do to hurt them. I had no intention of hurting them. And it wasn't, I was just the person who answered the phone, a placeholder. And I think in so many ways, both for good, for the unfortunate things that happen to us, and sometimes the good things that happen to us, we're just in that place at the right or the wrong time. And just being the placeholder then causes and conditions occur. So it makes it less personal in lots of ways, and also just seeing beyond the sort of the immediate conditions. So, like in some of my political work, when there are confrontations or disagreements, and someone sees things really differently than I do, what I remember is a social science definition of reality, that reality is the set of premises too costly to modify. Reality is the set of premises too costly to modify. And I think about what it's sort of like a house of cards. If this person changed this fundamental view, everything else would collapse, and that would be really hard. So it's again, it's a sort of reflection on causes and conditions and personality, and we live in a very imperfect world. So thanks for your comments, Dokai. Any other responses or questions? Jan.
I was going to use this little story in my talk next week, but it's relevant to this talk, and it's not my story. It's a Ted O'Toole story. So Ted O'Toole had this powerful awakening experience, and it, unlike a lot of awakening experiences, it lasted a while, and he was having trouble because he was living impersonally. And so he went to Tim, and he said, which I can relate to pretty well, is I can't go on like this. And Tim said, well, Ted, you've been practicing all your life to be Ted. You've got this. And so there's this, as you just said, it's too costly to abandon completely. And this personality, you're with the personality. The personality is not going to, the personality itself has an impersonal aspect, but you're not going to lose the personality. Ted is still Ted. And that was very reassuring to him that he knew how to be Ted, despite this sudden influx of everything kind of dropping away. And sometimes I think of it as this kind of I gave a talk a long time ago about space, and there were all these questions. Space comes up a lot in Buddhism, and there's all these kind of quandaries about when you dig a hole, was that space there before you dug the hole? Are you just uncovering the space, or was the space always there? And it's like you can make a construction, you can build a personality in this space, but the space, it takes the space to build the personality. So thank you for your talk. A lot of nice quotes.
Thanks, Jan. I mean, we have our personalities, we have our temperament, but they're not anything essential. They're just kind of the consequence of all these causes and conditions. And so the difficulty, I think, is when we become infatuated with it, or what sometimes in Vipassana we talk about sort of the personality view, which is kind of the hardest to give up, and realizing that this personality, which has been made up over time, it's a fabrication, and to understand it, yeah, this is it, but it is just a fabrication. And I think that that's a kind of it offends our ego in a way. Now, Kyoku. You have to unmute.
I didn't actually get to hear your talk, but what we're talking about in the questions is something that I kind of keep alive in me all the time, which is remembering that I'm not separate from everything that's happening. And that really helps me to just simply open up. It's like that you aren't who you think you are. And it's like when I get into arguments and I realize, well, we're all arguing about the same thing. And when we're arguing about religions and who's right and who's wrong, or and we get really attached to our particular view, but we're all unexplainable non-substance. That's impermanent. So part of my detachment training is remembering that I'm air, and even air and water are things that we've labeled so that we can talk about them. But I'm really glad that Dogen said there were something like 8.5, I don't know, million or billion moments. It's like, so, and it takes longer for something that's happening in my foot to get to my brain to interpret and kind of make up a picture of things. So it's a kind of practice of relinquishing the idea and just being with the experience that I really work with to help me. But it's surprising to me how strong the idea of me is, because it's not taking care of the body or the beings, but it's kind of learning how things are, period. And it's what I find is it's a helpful remembrance for me. So when I'm starting to get strong feelings, either happiness feelings, etc., just remembering this is just the universe operating. This is just the universe operating, and it's doing it faster than you can take it in. So pay attention, and that's very hard to do sometimes, but also very grounding in another way. Yeah, that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a current Theravadan teacher from Myanmar, Sayadaw U Tejana, who has become tremendously influential among practitioners. And Sayadaw is always talking about nature, and that understand what's happening in the body and the mind is just nature, over and over and over again, and to that we are our awareness that it's nature, and recognizing it such that ultimately that culminates in a kind of wisdom, but it is always just how things are, is nature.
Yeah.
Hi, Patrice.
Hi.
I'm going to go ahead and expose my ignorance a little bit and ask you to explain a little more about the different kinds of insight that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
For lack of better terms, that my mind processed it as relative insight and absolute insight.
We don't always talk of it in this way, but it seems to me that that's clearly what it is, that we have these sorts of relative insights about when we're misaligned with reality, the sort of what's hard to bear, impermanence, and the not self characteristic, and that sort of recognizing this in our day-to-day experience over and over, which is also really helpful for us, I believe, in preventing us from harming. Like we can, oh, this is just impermanence, recognizing cause and effect in our daily life, and seeing underneath that cause and effect our clinging to perfection, wanting things to be a different way. Or I talk about sort of contesting reality. We don't want things to be this way. And that I think that sort of like priming the pump over and over and over again, that we have in our consciousness, the idea that, yeah, the human predicament is anatta, anicca, dukkha, and that in a way primes us so that when we are really in deep meditative states, and this is usually what would happen, say, on a long retreat, when there's a lot of solitude, when there's not a lot of external stimulation or input, when the mind really has a chance to settle in awareness and is really just engaged in this sort of choiceless awareness, we have the more experiential insights into the suffering of clinging. And we see how this sort of momentum of experience. One of my teachers, Steve Armstrong, talks about it sometimes as in deep meditation, we have this non-conceptual awareness of experience as extremely pixelated. And it's the deep insight into how all of our structures on which we construct and cling, all of those are ephemeral, and that is really where the deep liberation comes to. And most of the time, even on a long retreat, we get these glimpses of it, we get tastes of it, but those tastes of that sort of deep, unmediated experience, which I think maybe in the Zen tradition I'm guessing here, might be talked about as an experience of emptiness. That is really where there's this deeper sort of insight that is eroding the clinging to wanting things to be other than they are, especially like not wanting things to change or wanting things to change, wanting that self, and that sort of freedom of non-clinging really enables us to act in the world with much more compassion, without attachment. And I think that's probably sometimes people, when they talk about what characterizes the Theravadan tradition, it's an emphasis on non-attachment, which is not a great word, because we all know that like attachment theory of parent and child, like there's really good attachment, but that sort of attachment of clinging, the stickiness of it, is what is hard. So I think those ultimate insights are the ones that are non-conceptual, non-verbal, deep, but that the other ones, which you might say are on the relative level, really prepare us, sort of to have our spiritual antennae out for them when we're in these deeper states. At least that's my understanding and my limited experience, and so that's what I can say. But I don't know if everyone would agree with that. Does that make sense?
Well, yes. Thank you for filling that out a little bit, and yeah, I think that's helpful. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to bring their voice into the conversation? I just really invite people. This is an opportunity for us to engage in a way, in a different practice that intersects, I feel, with Zen in a very beautiful way.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I was just very struck, Patrice, by what you said about impersonal, because that's something I realize as a student of Zen Buddhism, I've heard that a ton, but more in Dokusan than in Dharma talks, I think. And I was really struck by what you said about working with the phone and all that stuff, and people were yelling at you, but you said you felt safe. And I thought, how incongruous to be in an argument, and it's usually more with intimates, family, friends, a difference, and that feeling of safety and and anyways, the idea of feeling safe in conflict is very unusual. And so that's just kind of like a door to taking it to being impersonal, or to seeing it as impersonal, because that concept of safety, I've been thinking about that more, and how that gets in the way of feeling unsafe when we feel unsafe, which is often, I think, out in this world. So I really appreciate that. It's just very wonderful, marvelous way to think about impersonal. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And it's partly that I felt safe, but I also felt that I could offer safety, that, there were no consequences for me to retaliate or harm someone else. And I think that idea of harmlessness, again, Joseph Goldstein, the teacher that I quoted a lot, years ago, I heard Joseph say, that sort of, we were in a program where we were, learning to be community leaders and teachers. And he was talking about how teachers need to give the gift of safety, that it was really important that students never feel that that the teacher was not a safe person, and really taking that to heart about listening with, and having this intention of harmlessness. I mean, it's, we all make mistakes about it. We all unintentionally harm, but again, the focus then should be on not the rent, but on the repair. But I think this idea about safety, and in the Buddhist teachings on loving kindness, those teachings were they were an antidote to fear. The story is that it was the rains retreat, and the monks sent the Buddha sent a bunch of monks into the forest and said, this is where you're going to practice for the next 3 months. And the tree spirits were very agitated and felt that they were intrusive, that felt really threatened by the monks coming in there. And the monks got freaked out. And I think, this is often like those of us who have camped out sometimes and like, it's a little weird. And so anyway, the monks come back to the Buddha and they said, this isn't really the right place for us to practice. Send us somewhere else. And the Buddha said, no, this is where you're going to practice, but you're going to practice in this way. You're going to practice with complete goodwill toward every being. And if you are harmless, then no being would have any incentive to harm you if you offer no harm. So and the story is the monks go back and they practice this goodwill, abandoning any ill will, and that the tree spirits are not only placated but delighted, and the monks have a very good retreat. But the core of that story is really that abandoning ill will is an antidote to fear. And that's something that I just think about a lot in my political work and other things that I do, that I'm not demonizing the other. I truly try to abandon ill will toward the other, and that I don't have to be fearful. So I love that teaching, that metta and loving kindness for all is the true antidote to fear. That's where our safety is, in our own goodwill. Sure.
I'm recalling in the Pali Canon a well-known story that the Buddha talks about, and by this time he's been with two yogis, and he's in the forest on his own, and he reflects out loud to himself, saying something like, why is there still fear? What really is this fear about? And apparently decided to take the approach of, whenever fear arose, he would just stop and just be with that fear. Just stay with it, observe it. If he was walking, he would walk while he was being afraid. If he was lying down, he would continue lying down until the fear was no longer present. And it's interesting in a way how useful, of course, fear can be in terms of coming back to the moment. Because what I notice about my fear is I immediately kind of get not present, even though it may feel very vivid, but I'm so in my feelings and my thinking and in just the bodily experience of fear, such that I can't really pay attention to anything but that agitation. And it can be little stuff, it can be the fear that arises when I give a Dharma talk, for instance. And I just really appreciate that kind of looking the fear straight in the eye as you can anyway, and just staying with it. And that beautiful kind of, wow, if I didn't get afraid, how would I really learn about non-fear, no fear? That it's, I begin to really recognize how helpful it is to have this form and this human being, and how I can really put it to good use in terms of staying present. And you can't, when I get agitated because of fear or anything else, it's like I lose all my sense. I'm distracted, and it's not the sort of thing I would have thought of myself before I started practicing, but I really recognize the value of being able to spot where I'm getting stuck. And without that, I don't know how I would have the, just kind of the wisdom that an option is simply staying with it and staying present. And just as every time I go off, just staying with it.
Thanks, Kyoko. Practicing mindfulness with fear is one of the things that's so helpful about that, when we can really be mindful of the fear. And this is hard to do if you're in sort of an actual situation where there's something going on that is dangerous. But when fear arises and we're in the conditions where we can just sit and be mindful with the fear, what gets noticed is that the fear isn't solid, that it's something that's always changing and moving, and it's not a solid thing. So bringing that sort of complete awareness to that that really unpleasant emotion is really instructive, because we recognize it's tremendous how dynamic it is. But seeing it as dynamic also lets us see the fear as something that is not solid, that, like everything else, is conditioned and comes into being and eventually dissipates. And we can learn a lot about our own hearts and minds just from watching that over and over and over again. And Erin, I know you wanted to say something.
Oh, thank you. Actually, it kind of has maybe the same question in a different form. I also noticed the word fear, and I was struck by, at some point, I know, the three poisonous minds: greed, hatred, delusion, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Different names, but I always wondered why fear wasn't in there, because fear seems so closely related to anger. I mean, you tend to get angry at things you're afraid of, or that's one response or something. There's a relationship there. And I don't know. I just was kind of, why aren't there four poisonous minds, or what, just, I don't know. Just kind of curious, maybe your thoughts about that. Or
Sure. When we talk about sort of greed and hatred and delusion, it's sort of then all the manifestations of those. So we talk about hatred, but that really includes all the aversive emotions, or dispositions of the mind, which include fear, which is a very reactive, separating. In so many of the as we watch the mind with any of the three poisons, what we often see is that there's so much separation, so that when we're in a state of fear, we are really a congealed, negative, separate. There's that sense of separation. So fear to me, often, when people drill down from anger, what's underneath that is fear. So, like, often psychologists will talk about that someone is very, very angry about something, but then when you drill down, there's fear underneath that. I recently heard someone who is a mediator say that whenever there's resistance, so we might say, like, the angry person, whenever there's resistance, there's an unmet need underneath that. So often, whenever there's anger, maybe not whenever, but often when there's anger, there is something underneath it, and it is often fear. And that anger is more available, because it's something that can be externalized. You can get angry about something. But to get down to the fear, so for example, to take a more classic psychological example, So a man might be really, really angry about, say, his partner. Maybe the partner's a woman, and very, very angry about the world, and just a very angry person. And when you drill down underneath that anger, what there is a fear of abandonment. And so you push people away because you want to be the abandoner rather than being abandoned, in a way. So that would be kind of a classic example. So I think fear is often, it's part of the sort of cluster of aversive emotions that's in, when they talk about, greed, hatred, delusion. It's in that cluster. And I think it is really, just useful for all of us whenever someone is really angry to just ask, well, what's the need here? What is this person afraid of? Like, I might be, in terms of some of the anger that we see on the news, white men in particular being really, really angry about something. And it's the fear that they're going to lose privilege, that they're not going to be well regarded in the society. I mean, we can see often that the underside of anger is fear of losing status. People have a fear that this is not going to be a white Christian society, that it's going to be a brown multicultural society. And so that there's that anger, but underneath the anger is a fear. And it helps us in responding more compassionately in difficult situations, when we can get that. Is that helpful, Erin?
And unmute. Yes, very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Would anybody else like to bring their voice? There's an echo. Would anybody else like to bring their voice into the circle? We have a couple minutes before we close. Lillian?
Hi, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for everybody's wisdom.
Okay. I'd like to thank you, Patrice, for your presence and for your wisdom in what you offered us today and all beings. And I just want to say that Patrice and I will be co-leading a retreat together in November with the intersectionality of Zen and Vipassana, and really exploring more deeply the intersection of these two beautiful practices. So I would just like to offer people to consider that as we move forward. And I'd like to thank everybody for your presence today, your generosity towards Hoki-Oji with presence and other kinds of embodied gifts. And I want to just bring forward several offerings before we do the 4 great vows of dedication. In On September 17th, there is a retreat with the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. On September 26th, there's the Healing Retreat. On October 7th, we're beginning a 6-week study group on GGU Zamai, in which there are several facilitators, including myself, Dawn Russler, Adam Katodovich, Saren, Rachel Vilsack. Yeah, and I think it'll be a really good opportunity to explore this sutra together. And then on October 18th, there is a fall Caring for the Land work retreat. So please consider these offerings with your presence. So with that, I'd like to close with the 4 great vows and dedicate them. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you, everybody. See you all later.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you, Patrice. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.